Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining us now on the phone from Texas is GOP Senate candidate Ted Cruz. Mr. Cruz is the former Solicitor General of Texas and is one of the most talked about Senate candidates in the entire country. Mr. Cruz, thanks for being with us.
John, it's great to be with you.
All right, first, one question about Tuesday night's debate. The Benghazi issue certainly is not going away. If you are elected to the Senate, what would you do to make sure the American people find out if we have been intentionally misled by the administration or if there is some sort of cover-up involved?
Well, we need to have some serious scrutiny on that question. We saw in the debate between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama the president really dissembling on that. He claimed that the day after the terror attack, he referred to it as an act of terror. I think the transcript makes clear that that was not the case, but even more critically, if he thought it was an act of terror the day after it occurred, that raises the immediate question why he sent his UN ambassador to go on 5 television shows in the next week and say that it wasn't an act of terror, that it was a reaction to an Internet video. And indeed, for 2 weeks, his administration maintained that. The president himself went to the United Nations and blamed this terrorist action not on Al-Qaeda, not on deliberate hostility to the United States, but instead blamed it on some obscure Internet video. And I think that the repeated actions of this administration misleading the American people on an issue of national security is highly, highly troubling, and is part of a pattern, unfortunately, of this administration.
All right, so let's move on. I know you want to talk more about your Senate race. The most recent numbers, poll numbers, have you, and I think these are from last month, they have you with a double-digit lead, 26 points in Texas, in this race to fill the seat being left open by retiring Texas Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson. What do you think is the biggest factor that not only allowed you to come from behind during the Republican primary, but also jump out to such a huge lead in this general election?
Well, I think in the general election, there is a clear choice that is presented to the voters of Texas, and it is very much the same as the choice voters have nationally in the presidential race and many of the key Senate races all over the country. It is a choice between continuing down the road of the Obama Democrats, more and more spending, more and more debt, higher taxes, and more government control of the economy and our lives, versus getting back to our founding principles, to free enterprise, to fiscal responsibility, to individual liberty in the Constitution. I think that is a choice with enormous consequence for our nation. We are at the edge of a fiscal and economic cliff. We are bankrupting our country because the policies of the Obama administration are not working, and I think that's why so many Americans are rising up to turn things around and to pull us back from the edge of that cliff.
Now, of course, in the GOP Texas primary was a brutal one. You were outspent, I think, 3-1 by Texas Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, who was backed by Governor Rick Perry, but you won in part by painting Dewhurst and other Republicans as being too moderate. Have you, Governor Perry, and some other Texas Republicans fully reconciled since the primary?
We have, and it was an extraordinary journey. I mean, the last 2 years have really been remarkable. When we started this campaign, January of last year, I was quite literally at 2% in the polls, and the margin of error was 3%. Nobody in the state gave us a prayer. As you noted, we were outspent 3-1. It was a $50 million primary, and we went from 2% to not just winning, but winning by 14 points. And the reason for that is we saw an incredible team come together all across the state, of Republican women, of Tea Party leaders, of business leaders, of conservative activists, thousands and thousands of men on the ground who made the difference and won the primary. And I think the reason that happened is because this is not a typical election. This is not just another race, elect another set of candidates. Our country is in crisis. We are going broke. And that is why millions of Texans and millions of Americans are standing up and saying, stop spending money we don't have. Stop jeopardizing the future for our kids and grandkids. The unhappy truth is it has been career politicians in both parties who've gotten us in this mess. And that's why I think so many Americans are standing up saying, let's turn things around.
Now, out of everyone currently serving in the Senate, I wanted to get your take, and we're looking back in the last 2, 4, maybe 6 years. Who gets the highest grade from Ted Cruz on his or her voting record?
Well, I'll tell you, unfortunately, for a long time, I think Republicans in Congress had lost our way. If you look back to 2006, 2008, a lot of Republicans were going along with Democrats in growing the size of government, growing the debt. And when Barack Obama got elected, I think that kick in the teeth was a very helpful thing for the Republican Party, because what it produced is a new generation of leaders who are stepping forward. So we saw in 2010 new leaders like Marco Rubio in Florida, like Mike Lee in Utah, like Rand Paul in Kentucky, like Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, like Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. And I think that is starting to transform the Senate. It used to be that senators like Jim DeMint and Tom Coburn were very, very lonely voices when it came to standing for fiscal responsibility and living within our means. They received significant reinforcements in 2010, and I am hopeful and confident in 2012 we will see yet another wave of new leaders step forward who are serious about turning around the out-of-control spending and the out-of-control debt in Washington.
Now, with some other moderates in the Senate, like Maine's Olympia Snowe, Connecticut's Joe Lieberman retiring, there are some pundits out there who said that the Senate is moving further apart and that gridlock is only going to get worse. You mentioned how Republicans maybe went the wrong direction in trying to work with Democrats, but would you be able and willing to work with Senate Democrats, especially if they retain the majority?
Well, I actually think a lot of the spectrum in Washington between moderate and liberal and conservative is an artificial divide. After we won the primary, a number of folks in the media said, well, aren't you one of those extreme conservatives? And my only reaction is to laugh and say it is only in the strange world of the Washington, D.C. Beltway that it's considered extreme not to want to bankrupt the country. The real divide hasn't been between liberal and conservative in Washington. The real divide has been between the career politicians of both parties who have worked arm in arm, growing government, growing spending, growing the debt, and the American people whose future is being bankrupted. And so I think what we're seeing is a new generation of leaders who are ready to roll up their sleeves and fix the problem. I mean, there's a reason Congress has a 9% approval rating in this country, because we have had far too few leaders in the U.S. Senate willing to tackle the serious economic and fiscal problems we have in this challenge in this country. And, under Harry Reid, with Harry Reid as majority leader, the Senate has been AWOL. They haven't even produced a budget in over 3 years. They're simply not serious about fixing these problems. I think the American people are fed up with it and looking for leaders willing not to give speeches. It's not about speeches. It's about rolling up your sleeves and fixing the problems. And that's exactly what I hope and intend to do in Washington.
Well, let's talk about that fiscal cliff for just a second. It will be one of the most important and first tasks this new Congress and perhaps a new administration will have to tackle and find a solution on. If a version of the Simpson-Bowles plan or some sort of grand bargain comes to the Senate floor for approval, and it would solve a fiscal crisis and the debt and deficit problem, would you accept a 10-to-1 ratio on spending cuts to tax increases?
I don't think the answer is to increase taxes. I think that is often, Washington likes to push these grand bargains. What tends to happen in the past is the tax increases happen and the spending cuts never materialize. It's a little bit like Charlie Brown in the football, where you end up with those in Washington that promise spending cuts but want to raise taxes right now. And I'll tell you, the biggest reason I don't think we should raise taxes, John, it is our economy is struggling. We just came out of a recession and are at the verge potentially of another one. The worst thing you can do when the economy is struggling is jack up taxes on small businesses and job creators. That is the most likely thing to push us into another recession. We've got 23 million people who are struggling to find jobs and find work. And what we need to be focused on is growth, getting the economy going. You know, under President Barack Obama, our economy has grown just 1.5% each year. That's less than half the historical average. We've got to get the economy growing, and the way to do that is through reform and tax reform to remove the barriers that the Obama administration has placed in the way of small businesses and allow small businesses and entrepreneurs to flourish. That's what will create jobs, because two-thirds of all new jobs in the economy come from small businesses, and this administration right now is making it incredibly difficult for small businesses to survive, much less to prosper.
So it sounds like you're endorsing more of a Governor Romney and Congressman Ryan tax plan. They say they want to cut taxes and pay for those by eliminating certain loopholes in deductions, and mostly they say on high-income individuals. But both say that they would present some sort of framework and ask a group of lawmakers for specifics on what to cut. Which loopholes or deductions, if any, would you be willing to put on the table for a Governor Romney and a Paul Ryan budget plan?
Well, I think that's right, that tax reform is going to be the product of deliberation and compromise in Congress. I am grateful that Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan are taking on this issue and leading on the issue, and it's actually one of the areas where I have some real optimism. I think if we see a Romney presidency, which I believe is going to happen, and if we see Republicans take a majority in the Senate, which I also believe is going to happen, I am quite optimistic that we will get significant progress on tax reform, and I'm hopeful it may even be bipartisan progress, that there will be some Democrats willing to come along and work with us in getting it done. My view on tax reform is the tax code is far too complicated, far too Byzantine. There are more words in the IRS code than there are in the Bible, and not a one of them is good. I would like to see us move as close as humanly possible to a low, uniform, flat tax rate, a fair tax that is paid by everybody and is uniform and simple. Now, we may not get there, and I think a flat tax is a good ultimate goal. It may take multiple steps to get there. So in the interim, I will be happy to work with anybody, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, if they're working to shrink the size of government, to simplify the tax code, to lower the marginal rate, and move towards a low, simple rate. So I would put just about every deduction on the table. I think the two that are important to preserve are the home mortgage deduction and charitable contributions. But I would put everything else on the table. And if we're lowering rates enough, what can happen is the effect for the taxpayer can be the same or even better, but critically, by simplifying the tax code, what that enables and produces economic growth. We saw that powerfully under President Reagan when he championed tax reform, and we could do the same sort of thing again and get the same economic result.
Texas Senate candidate Ted Cruz, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to talk to us. It's been great catching up with you, and good luck out there on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to be with you, and I would encourage everyone watching and listening to come to tedcruz.org. Join us online. Together, we are saying Texans and Americans stand up to turn things around in the country.
All right, never hurts to get that plug in there. Have a great day, sir.
Thank you.